Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to part 2 of our REST API using Restify and Mongoose. And now we're going to get into authentication with JSON Web Tokens, password encryption with bcrypt, and some other stuff. Now, you may have noticed where we left off in the last video, when you make an update, you get this warning here. It says collection.find and modify is deprecated. Use find one and update. Okay, or find one and replace. Now we did use find one and update, as you can see right here. So this is, I don't know if this is a bug or what, but there's a simple solution to this. It's just to go right above where we did the mongoose.connect, and we just simply want to say mongoose.set, and we want to set use find and modify, and we want to set that to false, like that. Okay, so that should actually get rid of that message. So now I'm going to go over to Postman and do a quick update. So this is Kate Williams ID. As you can see, it's the only record I have in my database. So I'm going to make a put request to change it to Kate Williams. As you can see, it's Kate Smith right now. So let's go ahead and make that update. Make sure it worked. Okay, so now it's Kate Williams. Let's go back, and that error did not happen. Okay, I should have cleared this first, but it didn't happen. In fact, just to make sure, let's go ahead and clear this out. Run it again, and go back to the put request, send, and now you'll see we don't get that error. Okay, so I should have did that in the last video, but I completely forgot about it. All right, so let's move on. Now there's a few things that we need to install here. So again, I'm going to stop my server. And let's clear this up, and let's do an npm install. So in order to deal with tokens, there's basically two things we need to install. One is called Restify-JWT community. We're also going to be using JSON Web Token. And then we need to encrypt our passwords. You never want to store passwords in a database in plain text. So we're going to use something called bcrypt, but we're going to use bcryptjs because it's a lot easier to work with, less dependencies and stuff like that. So let's use bcryptjs. And I think that's all we need to install. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So that stuff should get added to our package.json. All right, good. So let's see where to start. Now, obviously, we're going to need users to deal with because we're not using like Twitter or Facebook or anything like that. We actually want to use our MongoDB database to store users and log in with or authenticate with our API. So we're going to need to create a new model. So I'm going to go to models and create a file called user.js, capital U. Okay, and our user model is actually going to be very, very simple. We're just going to have an email and a password. So let's say const mongoose equals require mongoose. Okay, and we'll create a user schema. We'll set that to new mongoose.schema. And we're going to pass in here an email, okay, type string, and let's say required true. We'll do trim true as well. All right, and then we just want a password. So password type also string, and required true. Okay, so that's all I want, and then we just want to do down here mongoose dot model and say user and user schema. All right, so that's it. Pretty simple. Now what we want to do is create a routes file. So in our routes folder, we'll create a file called users.js, just like we did with customers. And I'm going to go to the index real quick. And just like we required the customers routes and passed in the server object, we're going to do the same thing for users. So we're just going to go ahead and change this to users and pass in server. Okay. My first goal is to be able to register a user. So we'll have an endpoint at /register. We'll enter an email and password that should get stored in the database, along with encrypting the password with bcrypt. All right, so now that we did that, let's go back to users and our routes. And we want to bring in, first of all, Restify errors. Okay, let's see. We also want to bring in our user model. So let's say, where are we? We're in the routes. So we want to go .. outside of routes and into models, and we want user. Okay, we're going to call this user. All right, I think that's all I want to bring in for now. So just like with the customer routes, we're exporting a function here. Remember, we're passing in the server object, so we want to say module.exports, and we want to set this to a function. I'm going to use an arrow function. Server is our parameter. And now we can create our route. So we want a register route. So let's say register user. So I'm going to say server dot, and this is going to be a post. So server post to /register, and okay, and here we want request response next. So for our register, we're going to send, when we make our request from Postman, we're going to send an email and a password. So what I'm going to do is use a little destructuring to pull those out. So we'll say email and password, and we're going to pull that out of request.body when that gets sent. Okay, so now we have an email and a password to work with. Now we want to create a new user, so I'm going to say const user equals new user from the user model we just brought in. And then we want to pass in an object, and we want to just pass in email and password. Okay, so this is just shorthand for like doing that. So that'll create a new user. It didn't save it yet. It's just creating it. Now we need to hash the password. Okay, so we're going to use bcryptjs for that. So let's trying to think. Let's bring that in. We'll actually bring that in right here. So const bcrypt require bcryptjs. Make sure you do bcryptjs here. So now what we want to do is call bcrypt, and there's a method called gensalt, which is going to generate a salt so that we can hash the password. So this takes in a number. This is the number of rounds. So we're going to use 10 here. And then this takes in a function. We'll use an arrow function. And as far as parameters, it takes in error, if there is one, and then the salt. Okay, so it'll give us a salt that we can hash the password with. So in here, we want to call bcrypt hash dot hash, and this is going to take in the plain text password. Now remember, we have this user object we created from the email and the password that were passed in from, in our case, it'll be Postman. If you built a front end to this, it would be from React or Vue or whatever you use on the front end. So we'll just pass in user.password, which will be the plain text password. All right, then we want to pass in the salt that was given to us in the function right here from this parameter, and then we want a callback. All right, so this function here is going to take in an error, and it's going to give us the hash. I'm also going to label this asynchronous because I will be using await in this function. And now we should have access to the hash. So what we want to do is now set this user's password not to the plain text that it is now, but to the actual hash. So to do that, let's just put a comment here. We'll say hash password. We'll just say user.password is now equal to hash. All right. Now we want to save the user because we haven't done that yet. We created the user object, but we haven't saved it. We needed to first encrypt the password. So to save the user, I'm going to do a try catch. Okay, so inside the try, let's go ahead and create a variable of new user, and we'll set that to await, and we're going to say user.save. Okay, so saved, we're just using Mongoose to save the user. You could, if you don't want to use a sync await, you could do user.save.then and so on. But I like this syntax much better. And then we want to just do a res.send, and we're creating something, so we want to send a 201 status, which is created, and then we just want to call next. Okay, now if something goes wrong here, I'm going to use Restify errors, and I'm going to return next with an error. So we'll say in here new errors dot, and I'm going to use an internal error, and we'll pass in whatever the message attached to the error is, like that. Okay, and that should do it. So let's save this. And hopefully we can now register a user. So let's give it a shot. Let's run our server, npm run dev. And let's go to Postman. And let's see. I'm going to open up a new tab. We're going to make a post request. You can close these other tabs if you want. I'm just going to leave them open in case I need them again. So let's do http localhost 3000/register. And we want to add, let's see, headers. We want to add a content type of application, application/JSON. And then under body, let's go to raw, and let's put in our email and password. So we're just registering a user now. So I'll do brad@gmail.com, and let's see, password. Now I'm going to put a plain text password, but it should encrypt it. So let's do 1 2 3 4 5 and send. Couldn't get any response. Let's see. Let's see what we got for an error here. User is not a constructor. Okay, so we brought in our user model. Models, user.js. Let's see. We should be able to instantiate it right here. Let me look at the model. Oh, I just did mongoose.model. Okay. Let's copy this in customer and do the same thing. I don't know why I did that. So I'm just going to change all these customer instances to user. All right, so const user equals mongoose.model user, pass in the schema, and export the user. All right, so that should hopefully fix this problem. So let's try to register again. Let's send. Good, so we got a 201 created status. Now, just to check to see if this actually got entered into the database, I'm going to go to mlab. And let's go to our database, and you can see now we have a users collection, gets created automatically, and we have brad@gmail. And if you look at the password, it's completely encrypted. Okay, so bcryptjs allowed us to encrypt it. Now we need to make sure when we authenticate, we decrypt it. So that's another process, but this is up to this point we're able to actually register a user through our API, which is what we want. All right, so next step. What is the next step? I'm trying to think of what the best way to actually show you guys this. So let's create a separate file for our authentication. So basically, to reach into the database, find a user by the email that's entered, and then to match the password. We want to do that in a separate file. So I'm going to close all of these for now, and I'm going to create a new file in the root. Okay, so in the root, I'm going to create a file called auth.js. So this is like our authentication strategy. And the whole point of this is to check to see if there's a user by the email that's entered, okay, when we authenticate. Also decrypt the password and match that in the database, okay? And if it passes, then we just want to resolve the user or return the user, and this is going to be a promise. So we need to bring a couple things in. We need to bring in bcrypt. So let's bring that in. Require bcryptjs. Okay, we also want to bring in Mongoose. Now we want to bring in our model, but if I were to, let's see, I want to bring in our user model. If I were to just say const user, model / user like I did right here, it's going to give us an error saying that we already brought it in. So another way that we can bring it in to the auth.js file is we can simply take Mongoose and we can say .model and pass in user. Okay. If you don't do that, you're probably going to get an error. Now, I just want to export one method from this called authenticate. So I'm going to say exports.authenticate. And this is going to be a function. It's going to take in an email and a password. Okay. And I want this to return a promise. So I'm going to say return new promise. And a promise takes in a function. I mean, you could do function if you want. I'm going to use an arrow function. And it takes in two parameters, which is resolve and reject. So basically, when your promise is done doing whatever you want it to do and you want to return something from it, you call resolve and pass whatever you want in. If you run into a problem, an error, then you want to reject. So, and that's what the dot then and dot catch is. The dot then is the resolve, and then anything, any errors that you reject will be in the dot catch. So what I want to do here, actually I'm going to add a sync here because I am going to use a wait. We first want to do a try. Let's do try catch. All right, so in the try, we want to first get user by email. So we'll say const user equals await. We're going to use Mongoose here on the user model, and we're going to call find one. Okay, find one. We can find a user by anything. I'm going to look by email. So basically, I would do like email, but we can just do that. Shorten it. Okay, so that's going to find the user by the email. Now, if something goes wrong here, meaning it can't find the user, then we want to reject from the promise. Okay, so down here we'll say, actually let's put a comment here. We'll say email not found. So we just want to reject, and then I'm just going to send a message saying authentication failed. I'm not even going to say like email not found or anything like that, because I don't want the person that's trying to log in to even know that the email exists or doesn't exist. Basically, it's just an authentication failed. Okay, I think that's a safer way to do it. In fact, I've done it the other way, saying this email doesn't exist or whatever, and people have given me crap for it. So we're just going to say authentication failed. Now, inside here, after we do this get user by email, obviously if it's found, then it's going to keep going. So then we want to match the password. So to do that, we're going to use bcrypt. So we want to say bcrypt, and it has a method called compare. And compare actually takes in the password, which in this case is going to be the password that the user enters. Okay, so, or in our case, we're going to enter through Postman when we try to authenticate. And then it's going to take in the actual user's password that is found here. So to do that, we say user.password. All right, and it's basically going to compare those two. Now, this will give us a function, and this takes an error if there is one, and then is match. So if the passwords match, then this is going to be true. So let's first check for the error. I'm simply going to just say if error, then throw error. And then we want to check to see if there's a match, if the passwords actually match. So this is going to be an if else. Okay, so we want to say if is match, then what do we want to do? We want to resolve, right? Because remember what I said with promise, when it does what you want it to do, you want to resolve a value. So we want to simply resolve and then pass in the user. Okay, else, then we want to reject. This means the passwords didn't match. I'll just say pass didn't match. So we want to reject, and I'll just do the same thing and say, what did I say? Authentication failed. Sorry about that. I don't even know what the hell that was. What the hell was that noise? So authentication failed. All right. I think that's good. So just to kind of reiterate, we have an authenticate method that we're going to use that's going to take in an email and password. It's going to return a promise. Okay, we're going to try to get the user by the email. If the user isn't found, then it's going to just reject and say authentication failed. If it is found, it's going to move on. It's going to compare the two passwords, okay, taking into consideration the encryption. We're using bcrypt. If they match, then we're going to resolve, and we're just going to basically just return the user. Else, then we're just going to reject, and we're just going to say authentication failed. So that's what this does. Okay, so this is our authentication strategy. So now let's close that up and let's go back to users, and we now want to work on our auth route. Okay, our auth route is what we use to authenticate and get a token back. We haven't even started dealing with tokens yet, but we just want to make sure we can actually, basically match the email and password to the database. So let's go below our register. So this ends right here, and we'll say auth user. So we're going to say server, it's going to be a post. Endpoint is going to be auth. Okay, and let's see, we're going, whoops. It's going to take in request, response, and next. Let's see, it's also going to be asynchronous, async. So what do we want to do? We're going to get an email and a password, right? When we try to hit this auth point, we're going to send an email and a password to try to authenticate. So let's actually pull that out of the request body. Okay, so we get the email and password. Let's do a try catch. And in this try, we want to authenticate the user using the method we just created in Auth.js. In fact, we have to bring that in if we want to use it. So let's go up here and say const auth equals require. And let's see, that is what? Right outside, so .. /auth. Okay, so now we should be able to use the method authenticate. So we'll say const. Let's do const user. Let's put a comment here. So const user equals auth.authenticate, and we want to pass in here the email and password that's being brought in from, in our case, Postman, or whatever the front end is. So email, password. Okay, so if this fails, then what do we want to do? We want to, we'll say user unauthorized. So I'm just going to use Restify errors. I'm going to return next, and I'm going to pass in, new errors, and we're going to use the unauthorized error, and we'll pass in whatever is in this right here. Okay. So yeah, I think at least right now what I'll do before we do anything with the tokens, we have to call next here. Let's just console.log, and we'll just console log the user. Okay, so we can at least test it out. What's this? Schema hasn't been registered for model user. Come on, what are you? All right, so I just paused it and checked it out, and the reason we're getting this error here is because in our auth.js, this right here, when we brought in mongoose.model, this should be an uppercase U. Okay, so once I save that, you can see the error goes away. All right, so let's test this out. So we should be able to authenticate. If it happens, then we'll console log the user. If not, we'll get an error. So let's go to Postman. Let's open up a new tab, make a post request to localhost 3000/auth. And let's just add a content type. Let's do application JSON, and in our body we'll choose raw. Okay, so now we're actually trying to authenticate against the user in the database. So let's put in email, and let's do Brad. Let's do one that's not, remember we have Brad at Gmail. I'm going to do Brad1 at Gmail because I want it to fail. And then for password, we have 12345, but I'm going to do 1234. So let's see what we get if we try to use these credentials. All right, so something's happening here. Let's go back, and authentication failed. Why isn't it showing it? Handle promise rejection. Wait a second. Async. Oh, remember authenticate. Remember it returns a promise. Here I didn't use a wait. Okay, I could do .then. I could do that because it's a promise, but I'm using async await. So in that case, I need to do that and make sure that async is right here as well. All right, so now let's try it again. It should still fail, but we should see it down here. And there we go, unauthorized. Now, if I have the correct email but the wrong password, we should get the same thing. But if I have the correct password and the correct email and I send, okay, so we didn't actually send a response if it went through. But if we look at VS Code and we look in the console, you can see that it's getting logged. So this is happening right here. It just didn't do anything in Postman because we didn't do like a res.send 200 or anything like that. So now what we want to do, now that we know that our authentication is working, is we want to pass a token to the authenticated user. And that's where the two, did we install them? Yeah, JSON Web Token and Restify JWT Community. That's where these two come in. Now, JSON Web Token is responsible for creating the token. Okay, so it'll create the token, the expiration, and all that stuff. And then Restify JWT Community, we're going to use to actually protect routes. Okay, so if you need, like, for instance, to create a customer, you're probably not going to want just anyone to access that route. You're going to want them to authenticate, get the token, and then pass that token in through the header. Okay, whether it's through Postman or whether it's through React or a front-end framework or whatever. All right, so let's go back to users.js and let's bring in those two modules. So I'm going to say const JWT equals require JSON Web Token. All right, and then let's go down to our auth, and right here is where we're going to want to create the token. All right, so let's say create the way that we do this is we create a variable called token, and we need to sign the token using JSON Web Token. So we're going to say JWT.sign. I do have a tutorial on just this where I go more in depth in explaining this process, more so than I'm going to now, because we just focus on this. But basically we want to pass in here the user, so this right here. Okay, you can pass any data you want in the token, but we want the user. Now we will get an error if we just leave it like this, because it has to be formatted correctly. So to do that, we just want to add the toJSON method like that. Okay, next we're going to need the secret, okay, the JWT secret. So let's go to our config, because that's where I want to put this, and we'll put a comma here, and let's add in JWT underscore secret, and let's set that to, we'll do our process.env, and we'll call this JWT secret, and then for development, just whatever you want. I'm just going to say secret one, doesn't matter. All right, so we'll save that. And now we should be able to just bring that in, but we do have to bring the config file in. So let's do that. So const config equals, and we want just // Okay, so second parameter of JWT sign is going to be the secret. So config.jwt secret. All right, so let's see. Next thing we want to do is also pass in some options. Okay, actually just one option, and that's going to be the expires in, and I'm going to set that to 15 minutes. You can set this to whatever you want, okay, and you could set it to not expire, but let's say it expires in 15 minutes. Now we want to retrieve the issued at and the expiration, and then we ultimately want to return to the user that's authenticated the issued at, the expiration, and the token itself. Okay, so let's say const, we want IAT, which is the issued at, the EXP, and the token. And we want to, actually, I'm sorry, we're not getting the token here. The token we already have right here. But these we can actually get from doing JWT dot, excuse me, decode, and just pass in here the token. All right, and then like I said, the final thing is to res.send to the authenticated user. We want to send the IAT, the EXP, and the token itself. And that should be it. Let's say respond with token. Okay, so that's what we want to do. So let's save this, and let's go back to Postman, and let's try to log in with something that doesn't work, just to make sure that still works and we don't get the token. So we'll send, okay, unauthorized. Now we know 1 2 3 4 5 is correct, so let's send, and now we get the issued at, the expiration, and the token. Now right now this token is pretty useless because we don't have any protected routes, so let's go ahead and do that, and that should be it. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways. First thing I'm going to do is go to index.js, our entry point, and I'm going to basically say I want all routes protected except for auth. Okay, so to do that we need to bring in what is it? We'll call it RJWT, and set that to require, and this is going to be the Restify dash JWT dash, what is it, community? I keep forgetting that, community. And what we can do is go, where should we go? Let's go right under the middleware, and let's say protect routes. Okay, so we can say server.use, and we'll say a RJWT, and this is going to take in an object with the secret. Okay, so we want to say secret, and then the secret is in the config file. So we can say config.jwt secret, and then we want to tack on to this first, after this first parenthesis, we're going to say dot unless it's the, put an object in here, unless it's the path, and then this takes in an array, and we'll say slash auth. Okay, so unless it's the auth endpoint, it should be protected. That's what this is saying. So let's save this and let's try it out. So if I go back and let's go to the first one we did, which is the get request to get all customers, and I send, we get invalid. Okay, if I go to, let's see, which one's this? I want to go to this one right here where I can get a single, actually no I don't. Let's try to add a customer, which is, I know this is a little confusing. So let's add a customer. We'll say John Doe, John, we'll do no balance. All right, so if we try to send, we get invalid. Okay, so nothing's working because we haven't included the token. So what I can do is go back to the auth route. I'm just going to send it again just to refresh and get a new token. And I'm going to grab it. So I'm going to just copy this. Okay, and then we're going to go back to the customer's route. In the headers, I'm going to add authorization. And then since this is a JWT token, we need to say JWT space and then paste the token in. And then I'll send, and now it works, okay? Because we're authenticated, we got the token. Now, in your front-end framework, like let's say you're using React, when you want to access any of these protected routes, you have to make sure that you send the authorization header with the token, okay? You log in, you'll create your interface, your login interface, you'll get the token back, you'll usually store it in local storage, and then you'll send it along to any protected routes, and that's how that works. And if you want to check out my MERN-Stack course on Udemy, that's what we do. Okay, we don't use Restify though, we use Express. So let's try to add a user or add a customer. So we need to use the token. So I'm going to just add in here authorization and pass in JWT space, paste the token in and send. And we got a 201 back. So I'm going to go back to the other tab and send with the token. And you see that John Doe has been added. All right, so that's one way to do it. And you can add more routes in here. But if you want to just, let's say you only wanted to protect a couple routes, what you could do, I'm going to comment this out. And I'm going to copy this RJWT. And let's say we only want to protect the add, update, and delete of the customers. So I'm going to go to a customer's route and paste this in, this RJWT. We're also going to need the config. So actually I'm going to put this, let's put this up here, and let's bring in the config because we're going to need the secret. So const config equals, and we'll say /config. And then any route we want to protect, like let's say get customers, we don't really care about, get single customer, we don't care about, but add customer, let's say we want to protect this route. So what we can do is go right after the endpoint and before the callback and just put in here RJWT and put a comma here to separate that. So basically it's just a second parameter now. And we want to pass in here an object with the secret, which we can get from config.jwt secret. And that should protect that route. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to do the same thing for update. So right here, I'll paste that in, put a comma. And for delete, I'll paste that in, put a comma. So whatever route you want to protect, you simply add that piece of middleware. All right, so now let's go back, and we should be able to get rid of this authorization header for the GET request, and it should work. Okay, so that works. Now, if I go to add a customer, so this is the add customer. Let's see, I want to disable the token and try to add a customer. Let's say like Mark Smith, and we'll say Mark. All right, so if I try this without the token, I get invalid. But if I go back and I enable the token, the authorization, and I send, we get 201. And if we go back and check, Mark should be added. All right, so that's how you can protect individual routes. So you can do it either way. If you want to do it this way by saying, dot unless, it just depends on how many routes you have that you want to protect. All right, but I think that's it, guys. So we now have a full REST API with authentication, with JSON Web Tokens. So you could build a front end to this. That may be something you want to look into. It may be something I'll look into. Maybe I'll build it in React or Vue or something like that. But that's going to be it. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this two-part series, and I'll see you next time.